what I do know for sure is that, Charlie was someone who once said, guns save lives, after a school shooting. Charlie was someone who was willing to debate and downplay the death of George Floyd in the hands of Minneapolis police.
I think he called him a scumbag.
Right, have no regard, downplay slavery and what Black people have gone through in this country, by saying Juneteenth should never exist. And I think, there are a lot of people who are out there talking about him just wanting to have a civil debate.
Complete rewriting of history.
Yeah, there is nothing more effed up, than to completely pretend that, his words and actions have not been recorded.
So the character assassination of Charlie Kirk has continued post the actual assassination at the hands of a left-wing radical who, again, according to his parents, had been radicaled by left-wing LGBT ideology over the last year. And of course, this expands beyond random people on TikTok.com all the way to members of Congress and members of the mainstream media. In fact, at the time that I'm recording this video about Ilhan Omar, right now in this very moment, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going viral for quote mining Charlie Kirk, for lying about Charlie Kirk, for taking him out of context, deliberately so, in order to justify his murder after the fact. And make no mistake about it, despite the fact that these people are saying, oh, we condemn political violence. Remember Melissa Hortman, the lady from Minnesota? Remember her? We're definitely condemning all forms of political violence. The fact that they double down and keep pushing the idea that Charlie Kirk said these things that he either never said, or of course they're removing all context from after his assassination, is a way to signal their base that they actually agree with Tyler Robinson when he said some hate can't be negotiated with. Make no mistake about it. And a perfect example of this is Ilhan Omar, who has been on an absolute tear against Charlie Kirk. Now, of course, while she always gives the caveat that she totally condemns political violence, if you pay attention to what she's actually saying, it's that, oh, the right is responsible for political violence. In fact, she retweeted a video that referred to Charlie Kirk as a terrorist that also, in that same video, by the way, put the responsibility for his own assassination on him, because this is exactly who these people are. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Ilhan Omar going on a tear against Charlie Kirk, all because she didn't like the fact that he criticized her, that he didn't believe that she was very pro-American, based on the reality that that is 100% true. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
How cynical is it for big name figures on the right, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, many others, Nancy Mace yesterday, saying this is a Democratic Party problem? As if people like you are not getting death threats all the time, credible ones.
So, of course, Ilhan Omar ends up going on Zateo, which is Medi Hassan's new outlet that he's at. And I will remind you guys out there in the audience that Medi Hassan, despite the fact that he's condemning Charlie Kirk for all his hateful commentary, actually revealed who he was and had to apologize for it when he was doing an interview. And he actually revealed his thoughts on non-Muslims, comparing them to animals, talking about how they're subhuman, and all those different various things.
In Islam, the ends do not justify the means. This idea is totally alien to Islam. In Islam, what is halal is halal, what is haram is haram. We do not bend our law, our morality, for our short-term aims. Never. And we never lose the moral high ground. If we know anything of Shia of Muhammad, as Shia of Ali, as Shia of Hassan, as Shia of Hussein, we know that keeping the moral high ground is key. Once we lose the moral high ground, we are different from the rest of the non-Muslims, from the rest of those human beings who live their lives as animals, bending any rule to fulfill any desire. Once we do that, we are lost.
So the idea that this guy, who does not have clean hands at all, is going to throw shade at Charlie Kirk is patently absurd and ridiculous. But, of course, he gives the setup that Ilhan Omar receives death threats as well. And I want to make something 100% clear and in unambiguous terms, those death threats are completely unacceptable. Again, Charlie Kirk, who we're talking about today, liked to keep everything within the realm of debate and speech. Now, of course, Ilhan Omar and Medi Hassan, they want to to keep it in the realm of defaming and, of course, excusing violence. But that does not mean that we operate like them. That does not mean we become them, because guess what? These are people who don't give a damn about the United States of America. And if you want to honor Charlie Kirk, then you should actually honor the values of this great country.
I mean, it's actually disgusting. And it reminds you that although these people pretend to be adults, that they are sometimes, they think a lot less than even children do when it comes to compassion, when it comes to thoughtfulness, when it comes to being a leader. I did expect the president's address to the nation would have been a lot more compassionate filled. It would have been less partisan.
So this was recorded shortly after Charlie Kirk's death, before we knew the ideology of the shooter. And of course, they are putting out the narrative. And by the way, this 100% worked, that we have no idea, but it's very likely that the shooter was in fact right-wing. And by the way, when we go over the video that Ilhan Omar retweeted the day after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, that very same video will make that case. And of course, put the responsibility on Charlie Kirk. But we'll get into that a little bit later. But I just want to point out that Ilhan Omar is about to defame somebody who was assassinated for speech while she's talking about compassion with Medi Hassan, who quite literally has stated that he sees non-Muslims as subhuman. Again, really great people that we're going to be taking advice from. Really honorable folks right here to teach us a lesson about compassion. By the way, Ilhan Omar is the product of compassion in the United States of America. She is a refugee who was rescued from a refugee camp by this great country, and she uses the gifts that were given to her by the United States of America to attack everything about it, and again, tacitly approve of political violence through defamation after the fact.
He doesn't even know who the assassin is for him to say,
yes,
wing lunatic. I think it kind of denigrated his status and the status of the office he holds.
So again, as the left wing is defaming Charlie Kirk, as people are celebrating all over TikTok.com, as the left is trying to paint the narrative that the shooter is a right-wing person, as the left is ignoring evidence in order to do so, to such an extent that more people in this country right now think the shooter was right-wing and a Trump supporter than what he actually was and what his actual motivations were. Ilhan Omar is calling out the right for jumping to conclusions. Again, these people were doing the same exact thing. These people not only did that before we knew who the shooter was, but they immediately flooded the zone after the fact. And it's so effective that most people, or the plurality of people, actually believe that the shooter of Charlie Kirk, one of the most prominent Trump supporters in the entire country, happened to be a Trump supporter. Absurd, insane, completely hypocritical. But let us get into the defamation.
But what I do know for sure is that, Charlie was someone who once said, guns save lives. After a school shooting.
So again, if you're familiar with these points, you will know that these are often used by the very same people that are justifying and laughing about the murder of Charlie Kirk. He once said, guns save lives. Why am I bringing up that right now, one day after he was shot, if not to tell you that Charlie Kirk kind of had it coming? Charlie Kirk kind of deserved it. In fact, Ilhan Omar, again, we will go over this, retweeted a video that made the case that Charlie Kirk created the circumstances in which he was murdered on his own. It was his fault. He was the one who was behind it. When in reality, what Charlie Kirk was saying was that, yes, some people die in the United States of America as a cost of the Second Amendment from gun violence. Now, he also pointed out that there are a bunch of defensive uses of firearms in the United States of America. And in fact, if you take one of the most conservative estimates of defensive use of firearm per year from the National Crime Victimization Survey, we actually only are looking at categories of non-fatal violent crime like rape, sexual assault, robbery, and aggravated assault. And guess what? If you add up all of those defensive uses, you get 70,040 per year of defensive uses of firearms. Now, of course, simple assault and a bunch of other crimes not covered by the survey, but that's pretty substantial considering that 70,000 number is actually higher than the total number of gun suicides suicides and gun homicides in the United States per year. And what Charlie Kirk was essentially saying is much in the same way that we have car accidents in the United States of America and they kill people, we accept that. Of course, we try to minimize it as a consequence of the advantages that we get from being able to drive cars. Again, if he died in a car accident, would you say, oh, he was pro-car, he thought driving actually helped this country and he didn't want to prohibit people from driving, therefore he deserved it? No, absolutely not. But it doesn't stop Ilhan Omar for doing it right here.
Charlie was someone who was willing to debate and downplay the death of George Floyd in the hands of Minneapolis police.
Oh no, he was willing to debate and downplay the death of George Floyd. How can we do that to our greatest patriot saint in the entire country, George Floyd? Oh dear God, how could we possibly live with that? Again, it is perfectly valid to debate the circumstances of George Floyd's death. In fact, that was the issue that was brought up at trial, whether or not cause of death was the knee on the neck as asserted by the prosecution, or it was the fact that George Floyd swallowed a bunch of drugs that, by the way, were in his system at the time that he died, plus all the different various shenanigans that went down during his court case, and of course the public pressure that was put on the jury. But setting all of that aside, she talks about the downplaying of the death of George Floyd. It should have been downplayed, because guess what? Even if you believe that George Floyd was choked to death or asphyxiated or whatever by Derek Chauvin, that is an issue among the Minneapolis Police Department for them to address and adjudicate. And by the way, Derek Chauvin and the other officers were all convicted. I don't know why the NYPD, the police department in my city, ended up having to cut its funding when neck restraint has been banned by the NYPD since 1993. I don't know why we had a bunch of different criminal justice reforms across the country based on this one incident. I don't know why we over highlight the around 9 unarmed black people that are killed in police custody each and every year, especially when most of them are actively trying to arm themselves with the police officer's gun, or they are driving a car at the cop and are clearly and obviously presenting themselves as a clear and present danger to police. So yes, 100% we should have downplayed it. You people overhyped it, and the destructive path that followed in this country, the 30% year over year jump in homicides and all the other negative consequences, which by the way are disproportionately felt by the black community. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of excess deaths in this country, are definitely the fault of people overhyping George Floyd.
I think he called him a scumbag.
Right, have no regard.
So Medi Hassan's like, oh, he called George Floyd a scumbag. And I got a question, since, they're defaming Charlie Kirk a week after he was assassinated. Of the two, which one do you think is the guy who committed an armed robbery against a woman, where reportedly during the course of that armed robbery, the 6'6" man that was involved in that crime pointed a gun at the woman's stomach? Which one of them has a long history of criminality? Which one of them has a long history of abandoning his family in order to pursue drugs? And which one of them was just speaking about ideas in the public square? Which one do you think qualifies more as a scumbag? And again, a lot of the reason why people brought up George Floyd's past is because they were painting murals and putting up statues of him absolutely everywhere, pretending like he was a saint, when in reality, again, even if you believe exactly what went down in the trial was all on the up and up, and Floyd deserved to get justice against Derek Chauvin, he deserved both convictions, in reality, the guy was bare minimum a complicated individual based on the fact that he had a long history of drug use, a long history of criminality, and of course, none of that, to be clear, means that I wanted George Floyd to die. I didn't even know who he was until we saw that viral video, and I wish that he was alive, because the damage post his death has been absolutely disastrous all over my country.
Downplay slavery and what black people have gone through in this country.
So Ilhan Omar is making the case that Charlie Kirk is a bad guy and he downplayed slavery, and her proof that he downplayed slavery is as follows.
Downplay slavery and what black people have gone through in this country by saying Juneteenth should never exist.
He said that Juneteenth shouldn't exist. Charlie Kirk is downplaying slavery because he doesn't like the holiday Juneteenth. Now, I know you guys may or may not remember this, but I seem to recall the first day that Juneteenth actually came into effect after it was passed into law by the Congress and signed by the president, where everyone and anyone was pretending that this holiday was a thing for our whole lives, and the whole process was absolutely ridiculous. In reality, if you wanted to have a holiday to commemorate the emancipation of slavery, maybe it would be better suited if you had it, to commemorate the passing of the 13th Amendment, because Juneteenth, what it actually was a regional holiday mostly celebrated in the state of Texas, because that is the day that the Emancipation Proclamation was read there, which is the last state to have it read into that state post the Civil War. But in reality, it didn't actually end slavery. But to make matters worse, and I'm certain this was Charlie Kirk's criticism of the holiday, rather than actually celebrate it as an Emancipation Day, whether it's actually the day that we passed the 13th Amendment or not, it is treated like Black Independence Day. And the reason for that is because this was featured on a show called Blackish in 2017, where it was sold to the American population as a Black Independence Day. And this is where we run into problems. And I'm certain, again, that this was Charlie Kirk's primary issue with that, because it's one thing for us to have Juneteenth Emancipation Day on the calendar, but Juneteenth Independence Day separates out the Black population from the white population, giving them their own Independence Day, and that is not good for the country. Either we have a national anthem or we don't. We don't have a national anthem and a Black national anthem. Either we have an Independence Day, which we do, it's called July 4th, or we don't, and we end up with two Independence Days, which again further polarized the United States of America. And Juneteenth was passed into law despite the fact that it is a regional Texas holiday, in order to again subvert our regular Independence Day, because it's called, according to federal law, Juneteenth Independence Day. This is the objection that people have against it. It's not about downplaying slavery or anything of the sort. And for people like Ilhan Omar and Medi Hassan, who have the absolute audacity to come after Columbus Day and try to rename it Indigenous People Day each and every October, this is even more ridiculous. The idea that this holiday that cropped up out of nowhere, again, was brought up on a TV show and then resurrected post George Floyd, is a time-honored tradition across the United States of America, is absurd and ridiculous. So yeah, Charlie Kirk 100% justified in criticizing Juneteenth, and shame on Ilhan Omar for trying to pretend that that is somehow downplaying slavery. Shut your stupid mouth.
And I think, there are a lot of people who are out there talking about him just wanting to have a civil debate.
Complete rewriting of history.
Yeah, there is nothing more effed up, than to completely pretend that his words and actions have not been recorded and in existence for the last decade or so.
No, that is exactly what Charlie Kirk wanted. That's exactly what he did time and time again for a decade, and shame on you for trying to pretend that his words have not been recorded over the last decade. And again, this is also projection, because these people cover up the things that they've said in the past, because if you actually knew that Ilhan Omar once wrote a letter in support of an American who betrayed this country in order to join ISIS, you maybe would feel a little bit different about taking advice from her and who she thinks might be a terrorist or violent extremist versus who she doesn't. Same thing with Medi Hassan, and again, his commentary on non-Muslims and how they're subhuman.
It's important for us to call them out while we feel anger and sadness and have empathy, which Charlie said no, it shouldn't exist because that's a newly created word or something. Like, I have empathy for his kids and his wife and what they're going through, because I do not want that.
No one should go through that.
Now, Ilhan Omar ends up saying that she's the victim of people like Nancy Mace and President Trump, and then she goes on to do the I'm better than Charlie Kirk, because Charlie Kirk said empathy doesn't exist, but I actually have empathy, while again defaming him, quote mining him, lying about him. And let me just play Charlie Kirk's statement about empathy so you could understand that he in no way, shape, or form was saying that you shouldn't feel for anybody else's pain.
Instead, it is to say you're actually not in pain. So let's just a little very short clip. Bill Clinton in the 1990s, it was all about empathy and sympathy. I can't stand the word empathy, actually. I think empathy is a made-up New Age term that does a lot of damage, but it is very effective when it comes to politics. Sympathy I prefer more than empathy. That's a separate topic for a different time.
So what Charlie Kirk was saying right there is that he doesn't value empathy because he finds it to be fake, new agey, and phony. In reality, you can't really put yourself in someone's shoes, and despite the fact that Ilhan Omar is saying that she has all this empathy, she decided to go on this 3-minute rant where she defamed Charlie Kirk before she said, I feel so much for Charlie Kirk's wife and children. Well, then why are you defaming him right after he died when you know that his wife and children in the future are going to see you doing so? So what Charlie Kirk says is that we should have sympathy, and sympathy is this idea that I suffer along with you. Like, I understand your suffering. I'm not in your shoes. I'm not putting myself in your situation in this new agey, oftentimes BS way that Ilhan Omar's advocating for. I actually feel pain because you're in pain, not because I'm putting myself in your position. Because in reality, Ilhan Omar just demonized Charlie Kirk repeatedly throughout the course of this 3 minutes, and the reason why she did that is to make you know that you are not like him. You shouldn't feel bad for him. You shouldn't see yourself as similar to him. It's dehumanizing, and to wrap that all up with some nonsense about empathy is absurd in every possible way, because what she's saying is that this can't be you. He's destructive. He's monstrous, and then saying, oh, I feel so empathetic. Again, Ilhan, shut up. Now let's go to the video that Ilhan Omar retweeted, and by the way, still has up on her Twitter account right now at this moment, that she then called Nancy Mace out because she put this in a censure resolution against her, claiming that she never said the things that Nancy Mace claimed that she said, while simultaneously she retweeted this without any commentary on her page because she agrees with it. So again, if I retweeted, let's say, neo-Nazi memes all the time on my channel, like horrible racist things like that, and I didn't add any commentary, and then you said, hey Sean, it seems like you're in favor of neo-Nazi stuff, and I said, no, I just retweeted that, nobody would accept that response. In fact, I never do anything like that right now, and a bunch of people like Ilhan Omar would label me all of these horrible things, even though I make sure not to share that kind of crap, just like I make sure not to share other crap that I don't agree with. But Ilhan Omar doesn't want to be held to that standard, while at the same time, she's going to lecture you about empathy.
Charlie Kirk's dead, and before his body got cold, the far right propped his corpse up as a cudgel for their holy war. I've never seen more people within the same sentence both condemn political violence and then immediately call for political violence against their opposition. Don't be fooled. These people don't give a single about Charlie Kirk. They are just using his death to further their Christo-fascist agenda.
So right off the top, this particular video that was shared by Ilhan Omar ends up saying that the people who are concerned and upset about Charlie Kirk's death, his long-term friends, don't actually care about him. They didn't actually like him. They don't actually feel any sympathy. And one of the reasons why is because the very same people that are extending condolences to Charlie Kirk are actually calling for violence in the same breath. And by the way, while this is true for some people on the right, and some people were getting a little bit crazy, the fact is the people who are doing this are unambiguously on the left. This guy calls Charlie Kirk, and by the way, the people that are supporting him right now, Christo-fascists, so religious fascists. You know who believes something similar to that? Tyler Robinson, who again was motivated by his indoctrination into the LGBTQ agenda, and of course saw Charlie Kirk as a hate that could not be negotiated with. This was retweeted, by the way, a day after he was killed by Ilhan Omar. So she is also saying that Charlie Kirk is a Christo-fascist, a Christian fascist, just so you guys understand what's going on right here.
And before I continue, I need to say that this revisionist history about who Kirk was is just as perplexing. I'm seeing all these heartfelt statements coming from Democratic politicians and celebrities applauding Kirk as some bastion of free speech and debate. Kirk was a reprehensible human being. He enacted his political agenda by preying upon weak-minded people. He took complex socioeconomic issues and simplified them by pointing fingers at outgroups groups, demonizing those groups, and then sicking his massive following on them. He was a stochastic terrorist, an adamant transphobe.
So again, this guy's like, oh, he's simplifying complex socioeconomic issues and he makes it digestible and he preys on the weak. Then, of course, he calls him a stochastic terrorist. He calls him a transphobe. Again, all the things, by the way, that ended up leading to Charlie Kirk being murdered. All the defamation that was against him and the right prior to that was retweeted by Ilhan Omar immediately after he was shot. Right after Charlie Kirk is assassinated, Ilhan Omar looks at this video and says, oh, I'm the queen of empathy. You guys don't understand that. You're not as highly evolved as me. And by the way, this video right here proves that Charlie Kirk is a stochastic terrorist, which means that he was ratcheting up the rhetoric to make some unhinged person that they don't directly inspire to action, but again, due to the stuff that's floating around, ends up acting on their behalf because this is what they wanted. Oh, also, by the way, Charlie Kirk, reprehensible, Christo-fascist, just like most people on the right. These people are absolutely horrible. They're trying to enact their agenda upon you. They're a threat to you. Again, some hate can't be negotiated with. Shout out to their boy Tyler Robinson, who they didn't even realize wrote that exact same thing at the time that she shared this. And again, she still left it up. But yeah, the Charlie Kirk, stochastic terrorist. Talking to college kids, stochastic terrorism. Did I forget to mention transphobe?
And with his last dying words, he was spewing racist dog whistles.
So again, we have another lie right here that in Charlie Kirk's last moments, his last words were him spewing a racist dog whistle. Charlie Kirk was asked, by the way, who is behind the mass shootings. Now, Charlie Kirk asked, are we counting gang-affiliated shootings? Because one of the things that the left likes to do is end up using the raw numbers of all these mass shootings that happen in the country from the gun violence archive, while simultaneously trying to make the case that the majority of mass shooters are straight white males. But the thing is, if you use that big inflated number from the gun violence archive, what you end up discovering is that the majority of the mass shootings are gang shootings that happen in urban areas. They're drive-by shootings. And again, the people committing those are disproportionately and overwhelmingly black males. So he asked a clarifying question, but this son of a bitch, and by the way, Ilhan Omar, by proxy, because she shared this, is calling that a racist dog whistle. So acknowledging the reality, acknowledging the games that the left plays with their stats, that's a racist dog whistle. And again, this is the real reason why Ilhan Omar hates somebody like Charlie Kirk, not because she thinks he's a liar, it's because he was telling the truth.
Charlie Kirk was Dr. Frankenstein, and his monster shot him through the neck.
Again, this is the video that Ilhan Omar shared on Charlie Kirk's assassination one day after he was assassinated, retweeted on her page, where this guy says that the assassin, the man who murdered Charlie Kirk, by the way, because he believed some hate can't be negotiated with. I wonder what side of the political aisle is pushing that Charlie Kirk is this hateful, horrible person, a Christo-fascist as laid out in this particular video, a stochastic terrorist, ironically, coming from this particular video, and then says, oh, the assassin was created by Charlie Kirk. So this is what happens. You get assassinated, then people like Ilhan Omar defame you, they trash you, they lie about you, they quote mine you, they do everything and anything in order to basically justify your murder, and then they blame you for it. They say you're responsible because how dare you speak up in a way that Ilhan Omar disagrees with. Insane, disgusting, horrible, horrendous. But again, Ilhan Omar's like, oh, I never said the things that Nancy Mace wrote down in her resolution. I just shared this video. I retweeted it without any commentary at all whatsoever, by the way. And I didn't take it down even after it was discovered that the shooter of Charlie Kirk was motivated by LGBT stuff. Even after it was discovered that the shooter of Charlie Kirk did it because the shooter found him to be too hateful.
And all of that said, none of us should want to live in a society where these types of killings become the norm. It's the sign of a sick and dying world, and we can both denounce this violence and also realize that Kirk and his ilk's rhetoric are why it happens. And you can see this rhetoric continuing after his death. Far-right extremists are clogging social media, practically begging to use his death as an excuse to enact massive retributory violence against Democrats or liberals or leftists. They are looking for any excuse to justify their desire to kill their opposition.
Again, again, shared by Ilhan Omar. It turns out that the far right is using all this language talking about how they're going to enact violent retribution, and they're justifying this against the left, even though, again, nobody did that. What ended up happening was they did candlelight vigils. By the way, candlelight vigils that were then attacked again by the left. In fact, it is the left that were calling for more people to be killed, calling for Charlie Kirk's wife to be killed, even calling for his children, ages 3 and 1, to be killed. And yet this guy is flipping it. And again, it is shared by Ilhan Omar. Now, you want to compare and contrast that to George Floyd, by the way, somebody brought up by Ilhan Omar and Medi Hassan, and the response to that, and that was record-breaking rioting across the country. Again, in the first 90 days of the George Floyd riots, we had 540 different riots in this country. That is insane and absurd. That is how the left reacts. And what happened during that rioting? You had a bunch of people excusing it. You had people promoting the book, The Case for Rioting. You had John Oliver putting on some fat black woman who talked about how it's okay to loot and destroy Target because black people don't own anything, while she's screaming into the camera, and everybody had to pretend like this was normal, this was powerful, this was a beautiful thing, even though what we were witnessing was the destruction of our country, of our major metropolitan areas, the collapse of law and order over what? Over the death of one person that, again, hadn't been adjudicated, but at that point in time, the cops were immediately arrested, so even if you were demanding justice, it was already in the process of being delivered. So no, this is just not reality, but again, according to Ilhan Omar, it's okay to defame you after you've been murdered for your speech and then pretend that you're responsible for your own murder due to your speech, and then say that you're potentially going to react violently, when in reality, that did not happen. That did not occur. And by the way, I sincerely hope that nobody takes any action into their own hands. Nobody disgraces Charlie Kirk, because guess what? We are not the left. We are not the people who think that the whole world needs to burn down because we're angry about something.
As of writing this, we have no idea why Kirk was shot, yet the President of the United States is already using this as an opportunity to demonize his opposition. The hypocrisy is astounding and terrifying in how callous and calculated it is. These same folks begging for blood were silent when Democratic leader of the Minnesota House, Melissa Hortman, and her husband Mark were assassinated in their homes.
So the video goes on to list the same exact grievances, the same exact talking points that all of these people are using. They talk about the former Speaker of the Minnesota House. By the way, nobody talks about the fact that no one was celebrating her death. They bring up George Floyd. It's perfectly valid to debate the manner of George Floyd's death, and it's perfectly valid to tear down this saint image that they built up of George Floyd. But to be clear, nobody was celebrating George Floyd's death either. And again, he says, oh, it's all about gaining power and whatnot, when what we see right here is that this is all about the left gaining power. They're the ones who are demonizing you. They're the ones who are blaming you. And they're like, how dare you assume that the person who is behind this was a left-winger just because he shot one of the most prominent Trump supporters in the entire country, and again, was very likely always going to be 90% plus chance motivated by left-wing ideology. And again, the fact that these very same people immediately after we heard this person's identity ended up propagandizing their audience into believing that this guy was a groyper based on nothing. There was no evidence of this, make no mistake about it, shows you exactly who they are and who they've always been. So yeah, Ilhan Omar, who by the way apparently was attacking somebody at a church today, she was allowed to speak at a church saying it was BS that you're talking about Charlie Kirk for who he actually is, wanted to defame him even more. They're not stopping, they're still cheering it on. You're disgusting, you're horrible, you're terrible. And of course, because Republicans are Republicans, you were able to escape censure by one vote, because this is the game. Anytime you need something passed by the Republicans, this is the Thomas Massey rule, you're always going to get the exact number of Republicans that you need to either pass it, or if you want to vote it down, -1. And that's exactly what happened in that censure vote, and it's absolutely shameful. And make no mistake about it, the reason they're defaming Charlie Kirk after he died, the reason they're quote mining him after he died, is because despite their appeals to empathy, despite them saying that they condemn political violence, got to make it as vague as humanly possible, don't want to talk about the specific assassination of Charlie Kirk, is because they want to signal their base, that they're fine with it. And even if they don't want to outright say it, and even if they don't believe it, they know that their base believes it, and that's why they're putting out these signals. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Ilhan Omar signaling to her base that the Charlie Kirk assassination isn't really that big of a deal. Till next time.